Hi, I'm Chris Bishop, and welcome to this edition of Captains of Industry. I'm in Dubai, inside the headquarters of the Africa and Middle East division of one of the world's biggest technology companies, Microsoft, with a market capitalization of around $1.1 trillion. I'm here to speak to Samer Abu Ltaif, the president of this division, about his plans for business in Africa. Just give me an idea of, before we start, I want to talk a bit more about you, just the impact and significance of your company in these present times in Africa and the Middle East.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I've been with the company for 15 years now, and I feel privileged to be, with Microsoft, more so in Middle East and Africa, a region that is very diverse, very dynamic, and experiencing growth in multiple facets, more so in terms of the impact of technology. I feel that I had also the privilege of observing a lot of changes over the last 30 years that I've been a part of the information technology evolution in this part of the world. And Africa specifically, I would say, is very well positioned to leverage the power of this new revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. And hopefully during this discussion with you, we would shed some light on the potential and how we could harness that potential for Africa. I am personally very optimistic and, more importantly, more committed to make sure that this happens.
So before we go on to talk a little bit about you, yourself, the man, I mean, this fourth industrial revolution, it's a phrase that's thrown around at the World Economic Forum. A lot of people on the continent of Africa, they fear it. A lot of people are still questioning exactly what it's going to mean for everyday life and jobs, particularly people in the unions. What do you think it can do to transform life?
Look, I think it is undoubtedly very significant, and I think we see this in every facet of our life today, in the way we have even socially have changed our habits and our day-to-day interactions with each other at family level, friendships. Socially, you could tell, I mean, mobility has really shifted in a very big way the dynamics of how we interact and how we collaborate. And there are more, I would say, elements that are coming in play around the availability of technology, the proliferation of these new features that exist today that are taken for granted. So in many ways, I want to more think around the opportunity away from the fear, but I can understand and connect as well with the fear. If we go back in history and we think about when, for example, automation in the 70s was introduced into the banking system in the world. I will use that simple example for people to connect to it. Like, people thought that automated teller machines are going to replace tellers, and that meant firing the tellers in the banking system. In fact, what happened is that these were complementary to the ability of banks to upskill and upgrade the impact of their tellers to become sellers, to become customers, sales representatives. And I think we need to think more about artificial intelligence, and think more about all these, if you like, innovations that are coming through technology as an amplification of the human capital rather than a threat. And there is no other way to approach this but that way, because if we are so obsessed with the fear, that means we are not going to do anything about it, and there is a way to do something about it that would mean to us value.
I think one of the fears I could perhaps articulate from my field, I mean, 20 odd years ago, when as journalists we started using the internet, everyone said, oh great, we're a growing gang of news gatherers communicating around the world. But when I look 25 years later and I see things like fake news, I see things like online trolling or whatever it is, I sometimes worry for the technology. But how do you think companies like Microsoft can actually stop this kind of abuse?
I think the responsibility we have is not to compromise on values and ethics. The responsibility that we have to ensure that there is this thin line sometimes on how technology can be a weapon that is destructive if it is in the wrong hands, versus being an amazing tool that will enable people to realize their potential, that will be really a door opener for them to pursue new ventures in their life. And there is a huge responsibility on us to work with governments, to work with institutions on policy, on innovation, on governance, on ensuring that there is a level of, I wouldn't say control, but I would underline governance. We need that. It is required because these things cannot go out of control to the extent that it would be harmful on the social aspect, on the economic aspects. Yeah, we talk a lot about disruption, but no one wants to disrupt to the level where local economies are going to suffer. And that's important.
I would talk a lot more about your African business in the second half, but one question I do have you here. Everybody knows that the legislation in many African countries is still far behind the technology. How's that going to affect businesses like yours?
Part of the challenge that we have, I mean, I'm like, conscious of the fact that we have few challenges there that we need to tackle, and there is a responsibility of partnering with governments on, and academia primarily. One is the fragmentation that we see in policy. There is an element of ambiguity also that can vary from country to another, even across the continent, like country to country, in terms of enabling data access, enabling the trade, if you like, of access and resources is still not in place. So that need to be harmonized. That's definitely something that is of value. Towards that, just to talk about what we're doing, we have created 2 centers, one in South Africa and one in Kenya, in partnership with 2 universities, for us to build that, policy innovation forum, for us to work as a think tank around what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the blockers, how we can guide really towards a more harmonized and consistent way, because that's important for foreign investors. That's important also for the proliferation and the healthy, if you like, adoption of technology. This is key for us in terms of that policy. Of course, there are other aspects associated with the upskilling and what do we do with the education systems. One would say that, okay, can we wait until you revamp the whole education system in a continent, knowing the speed at which the change is happening in terms of digital? Our view is that, yes, we need to work with the educators, we need to work with the stakeholders in the education system, but in parallel, what can be done to upskill people?
Do you think you'll ever get to a point where you're going to African countries saying, look, we've got an investment we want to put in here, also we are prepared to build a college or set up an education system that goes along with it? I mean, a lot of countries in Africa, as you know, they're still very suspect of outside money and building educational facilities.
Our approach is not like that. Our approach is different in terms of how we want to tackle the opportunities in the continent. Let me share with you how we think that there is an opportunity for Africa to leverage the change that's happening and that digital transformation that you spoke about. One is that we need to recognize that this is, again, the youngest continent. And every year, there are 12 million young people who are joining the workforce in Africa. The potential by 2035 is that Africa talent pool in IT will be greater than China, India, and the United States combined. That's amazing. But what can you do in order to ensure that their upskilling and their abilities to leverage the jobs that will be available by 2035 is in place? And it's not about building schools and universities and colleges, it's about also taking that at scale in terms of the learning and the intense technical learning. For that, we have built platforms, digital platforms for us to reach. Today, we have a reach of 172,000 active users on our cloud society. We have built skills labs. We have built internships through our Microsoft for Africa initiative. This is the focus that we are trying to put, is that how we can reach to more people. With the African Development Bank as well, we have a memorandum of understanding that we signed in 2018 that by 2025 we will upskill 50 million Africans. So these are like very important ecosystems that we are trying to build in order for us to partner with others in order to reach to more of these young people. The other piece I spoke about policy, I think that's also very critical. To me, in the last 2 years, what gives me pride from where I am at Microsoft is that we built the data center, the first hyperscale data center out of South Africa for the whole continent. I think that is the one that enabling small and medium enterprises, enabling our customers to innovate similar to any other place in the world, and enabling us, of course, to get into some of the work that historically was difficult to do because it requires very significant capex investments. Today we are able to do that leveraging cloud computing.
And just lastly, very briefly, what about the infrastructure? As you know, in Africa, still internet penetration is very low in most countries. Yes. How worried are you about the infrastructure might not keep up with your plans?
That's another challenge where you think about, like, there are a lot of countries that are still less than 20% broadband penetration. That does not give you the critical mass needed for you to create out of, the digital transformation any economic value. We have initiated, I would say 5 years back, this approach where we said for these rural areas, how we can reach to them. What we leveraged the what we call the airband. Primarily is a technology that will enable you to use the spare spectrum on TV broadcasting for you to use it for data. We have pilots in 21 pilots in 9 countries. Through that pilot, we managed to reach to 13 million people. That's, I think, an indication of how you could, leverage creativity and leverage what is available to you in order to move the envelope. We work a lot with the telecommunication companies on ensuring that our presence in the continent is one that complements them, is one that enables them to prosper as well. So for them to also increase their investment, because you can't be seen to be leveraging what they are doing without contributing to their profit, to their prosperity.
We'll say in the first half we talked about the fourth industrial revolution and where the industry is going, but let's talk a little bit more about the man that you are. In particular, you had a very, what might you say, turbulent time that you grew up in. Just tell us a bit about your background and where you grew up.
Yeah, I'm Lebanese. I grew up in Lebanon. And when I was 9 years old, unfortunately, the war started in Lebanon. And when I reflect now about it, I think it was very tough. I wouldn't wish anyone to go through that experience. This is an experience where, you get displaced. You leave from one school to another because you are having to escape in a small country as the war is moving and the battles are emerging. It is a time also when potentially you would lose loved ones, and it's tough. Now, these are elements that when you think about it now, they were not under your control as an individual, but really your parents and you yourself, and this is more so when I was going to the American University of Beirut, you start thinking around how do you survive day by day. That gives you some attributes of resilience. And then the other piece is that how you can continue to be optimistic and focus on your future versus being dragged by the set of events into what will really derail you from achieving something in your future. I would say, and hard to say it, is that, I look at it is that, having grown up in a war-torn country, has given me maybe some of the attributes that shaped my leadership in terms of resilience, in terms of tolerance, in terms of also appreciation for all the great things that exist today. I see them for me, for my loved ones, my kids, and I wish that, for everyone.
You have children of your own now, but at that time, it must have been, as a young child, must have been terrifying for you to have lived through that. Just give me, it's hard for anyone to imagine, but just give me an idea of how bad things were.
Well, look, the fact that you leave home and you have that idea going to school, whether there is a possibility that you might not come back home. That could happen for anyone as a result of anything that can happen in life. It can be a car accident in a normal life. But for you to be consciously every morning thinking that you turn your back home going to school and you don't know whether you'll come back. That's unbelievably tough to think that daily you are in that mindset. Or the arrangement that existed during certain phases of the war where all night we are in the shelter because of the bombing, and it's random bombing for civilians that were affected, and then around 7 a.m. in the morning everything is calm. As if I think the warriors, they have a dual job. I mean, they fight at night, they work during the day. So during the day it was calm. I mean, people Lebanese who lived that part between 1975 and 1990 could relate to the experience I have. But the bottom line is that my heart goes to people who are living in countries where there's conflict now. I hope that we see more peace in those areas. I connect a lot with that, and again, the more I reflect about my own experience, I feel that I was blessed that I survived it, and I am also grateful for what is a very tough experience that has shaped me in a way to be stronger, to be more grateful.
And do you think, these days it's very fashionable to go for sort of management workshops and the like, and team building exercises, but when you think about your experience at a very young age there, how much has it steeled you think, for the...
I reflect on that. At Microsoft we do have those sessions where people share moments of truth, people talk about themselves, share your vulnerability or what shaped you. From time to time, I reflect on those because, over time also you tend to forget. And then I invite myself to think about them because it is a continued, I would say, invitation for myself to appreciate where I am today and how I live today versus the situation I was in. And also a message to my children and my loved ones and to people who work with me around how we need to anchor ourselves into what matters. Sometimes people get so obsessed with the, if you like, the day-to-day, the short-term challenges, the commercial aspects of life. They become so critical for us. At the time you forget that there is so much that's happening that is not recognized and not noticeable, and these are the more critical things.
But then when you started working and became a man, then you moved to Kuwait, and it's unfortunate to say the least, on the eve of the Iraq invasion. So it seems that conflict seemed to follow you. Just tell us a bit about that.
Look, I was blessed to have the opportunity to be recruited as a off-campus hiring by NCR Corporation in 1989. And to leave the war zone, I recall taking a taxi to the Damascus airport because Beirut airport was closed, to travel to Kuwait and join my eldest brother there and interview at NCR and being accepted, and went to the United States for training and come back. And then on the eve of 2nd of August 1990, I recall I was sleeping in the apartment and hearing the bombing on the borders between Iraq and Kuwait. I thought that it is something from the past, and it's just hitting back. Back then, the mobile phones were not still available, and I realized that something else is going on, where the regime back then in Iraq decided to invade and annex Kuwait. I have to admit that part of me was saying, what's wrong with me? Am I cursed? Or did I bring my own curse to a beautiful Kuwait that I owe a lot to as a country? That's where I started my career. I came back to Kuwait after Kuwait was liberated, by the way. And I will never forget landing. I came through Cairo, landing in Kuwait in March. That's after the liberation, and seeing around 700 oil wells on fire, an impact on the environment that is unbelievable. And the survival of the people during that phase to rebuild Kuwait. I stayed there for 6 years after that. I feel good that at least I had the opportunity to be part of that also recovery of Kuwait.
So in more latter years, you've had your attentions on Africa as well, and particularly data centers, which is a core part of your business there. How do you see the market unfolding in terms of data centers in Africa?
Look, I think the data center is a game changer. And that's why we are very proud to be the first to bring it in order, if you like, to light up all these opportunities. But to complement that, we also did other things. I spoke about the upskilling. I spoke about reaching to 1.7 million small and medium enterprises. Already like 700,000 of them are online. We are working a lot also on how we can evolve an ecosystem of partners, of software vendors, to leverage the power of the data center. We're working on key customers to ensure also that their digital transformation agenda is going to leverage from the power of data centers instead of them continuing to procure hardware and storage, which is not a competitive differentiation for them. In addition to that also, what is the impact of these data centers on the African continent on aspects that touch people more broadly than just the people who are in IT or are in, if you like, in enterprises? Look at agriculture. Today, precision agriculture is a key focus area for us to leverage the power of our data centers and the innovation of machine learning and Internet of Things, IoT. And to that, we built, an MOU with the Alliance for Green in Africa, for Green Revolution in Africa. We wanted to shape the policy. We want to shape how technology can be leveraged in order to give the farmers the ability to have a sustainable, efficient, effective, profitable business. That's key. So I'm giving you the impact and then what we're building in terms of 12,000 partners across the continent that are now leveraging the power of the data center. The opportunity is huge. We spoke about youth and their impact. We spoke about the potential for us to do greater things. Now, of course, it might sound a little bit strange for me to say that more competition of Microsoft coming to Africa and enabling that ecosystem to evolve is something positive. I mean, we want more of investments to come to Africa. We want to have the level of contribution of everyone to give this continent what it deserves, because this continent has the potential to give back to the world, not only to the continent.
What about competition on the continent? As you probably know, one of your leading competitors just built a data center in Cape Town. Yeah. How does that concern you?
As I said, I think there is so much potential in Africa for all of us to contribute. I think we need to make sure that we don't leave as IT companies responsible for this transformation, the countries in Africa to be left behind in terms of the digital gap that could be created. To us at Microsoft, the priority number one is going to be upskilling, because there is no value in bringing technology without making sure that the people have the tools, have the knowledge to leverage it.
And just to give you an idea of how far you've got to come in terms of upskilling, there was a story the other day in South Africa that Fourth Industrial Revolution and digital training is now going to go into the school curriculum, which is a good thing. But we are talking 20, 30 years maybe before the whole system changes. How do you view that?
Look, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot wait. I think the mandate to change the curriculum is there globally and more so in the African countries, and I think that's something that we need to start working on, but it takes time. It takes time because that's a discussion, as you can imagine. It touches on the infrastructure in the schools, it touches to the affordability, but it talks also about the capability of the teachers to be at par with the requirements and the mandate that is happening. And there is a cultural shift as well in ministries of education, educators in general. So there's a big topic around the revolution that is needed in education, but we cannot wait. That's why we're bringing, if you like, complementary initiatives in order to upskill the continent. I mean, this MOU that I spoke about with the African Development Bank is aiming at that. The work that we're doing with the training centers, the skills labs, the internships that we have, all these elements are contributing to helping gradually the continent to leverage the youth and also the potential that exists as a result of investments. Another thing that we did last May, we announced also bringing our corporate development and research to the continent. Today we have two research and development centers out of Nairobi and Lagos. I feel very good about this because this in the coming few years will mean hundreds of high caliber, deep level R&D happening in the continent for the globe. I think that's a signal of Microsoft acknowledging the talent that exists in Africa. And also it will be very good anchor for us to look at internships, to look at the way we can also partner with academia in order to evolve the agenda in the continent.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. We've been interviewing Samer Abu Ltaif, the CEO of Middle East and Africa for Microsoft. I say from me, Chris Bishop, in Dubai, it's good night.